Billionaire leaves his girlfriend at his mother's house and is shocked by what he sees. Michael Thompson was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His hands trembled so much he could barely hold the car keys as he sped across the city, ignoring traffic lights and angry horns. When he opened the door to his mother's mansion that Thursday afternoon, the last thing he expected to find was that scene. Amber, his girlfriend of just 6 months, was standing in the living room, holding a water bottle and pouring the liquid directly onto the face of Margaret, his 72-year-old mother. The elderly woman was screaming with her hands raised, her face wet, her white hair stuck to her forehead. Michael froze in the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. "My God," he shouted, dropping his leather briefcase on the floor with a dull thud. "What's going on here?" Amber turned her face to him, her eyes wide with surprise. She wore a simple red dress outfit that Michael had bought for her weeks earlier. Margaret, seated in the beige armchair she always occupied, brought her hands to her chest, gasping. "Michael, son." Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. "Amber, have you lost your mind?" Michael strode across the room, his Italian shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. "What are you doing to my mother?" The young woman opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Margaret struggled to rise from the armchair, holding onto the furniture arm for balance. Her face was pale, the wrinkles deeper in the afternoon light streaming through the large windows. "Wait, Michael. It's not what you think." Amber finally managed to speak, her voice trembling. "Not what I think." Michael ran his hand through his dark hair, his navy blue suit wrinkled after hours of tense meetings. "I see you pouring water on my mother, her screaming, and you want to tell me it's not what I think." Margaret took a step forward but staggered. Amber dropped the bottle on the sideboard and rushed to support her. Michael also moved, but his girlfriend was already holding the elderly woman by the arms. "Get away from her," he ordered, his voice louder than he intended. "Michael, for God's sake, let me explain," Amber pleaded, still holding Margaret carefully. "Your mother needs to sit down. She's having an episode." "An episode you caused." Michael pushed Amber aside with a rough gesture and held his mother by the shoulders. "Mom, are you okay? I'll call an ambulance." "No, no need." Margaret was breathing with difficulty, bringing one hand to her forehead. "Son, listen to the girl." "Listen? How can I listen to anything after what I saw?" Michael guided his mother back to the armchair, his movements careful but tense. "Amber, I think you'd better leave. Now." Tears began to stream down Amber's face. She grabbed her purse from the sofa, her hands shaking. "Michael, you don't understand. I was helping her." "Helping?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Pouring water on the face of a 72-year-old woman? What kind of help is that?" Margaret tried to stand up again, but dizziness made her fall back into the armchair. Michael knelt beside her, holding her cold hand. "Mom, stay still. I'll call Dr. Wilson." "Don't call any doctor," Margaret said, her voice firmer now, "and don't send Amber away." Michael looked at his mother as if she had spoken in another language. "What do you mean, not send her away? You saw what she was doing." "I did, and I asked her to do it." Margaret closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "The pain is fading now. Thanks to her." The silence that fell in the room was so heavy that Michael could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. He looked from his mother to Amber, who remained still near the door, tears still wetting her face. "What are you talking about?" Michael rose slowly, confusion replacing the anger. "What pain?" Amber wiped her tears with the back of her hand and walked back closer to them. Michael noticed she was carrying a white towel she had picked up from somewhere. "Your mother has had severe migraines for months, Michael." Amber spoke softly, gently drying Margaret's face with the towel. "Terrible episodes that leave her debilitated for hours." "Migraines?" Michael shook his head. "My mother never told me anything about migraines." Margaret opened her eyes, and Michael could see something in her gaze that troubled him. Guilt, sadness, shame. "Because I didn't want to worry you, son," she said gently. "You already have so many problems with the company, with the travels, with everything. But Mom... Michael sat on the edge of the armchair, holding her hands. You should have told me. That's what I'm here for. Are you? The question came out so quietly he almost didn't hear it. When was the last time you spent more than an hour here at home, Michael? When was the last time we had lunch together? The words hit Michael like a punch in the stomach. He opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because she was right. In recent months, his visits to his mother's house had become shorter and more spaced out. An hour here, half an hour there, always with his phone ringing, always in a hurry to get back to the office. Amber sat on the sofa across from them, the towel still in her hands. I found out by chance, she began to explain, her voice still weak. 3 weeks ago, Michael had traveled to Washington, D.C., and I came to visit Mrs. Margaret. When I arrived, I found her collapsed here in the living room. Michael felt his blood run cold. Collapsed? Mom, you fell. It was just a dizzy spell. Margaret tried to downplay it. Nothing serious. Nothing serious? Amber leaned forward. She had been on the floor for almost an hour, Michael, unable to get up because of the pain. If I hadn't come... Her voice broke, and new tears welled up. Michael looked at his mother, really looked, for the first time in months. The deep, dark circles under her light eyes, the paleness of her skin, the hands that trembled slightly. How had he not noticed? Why didn't you call me, Amber? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Because your mother made me promise not to tell... Amber looked at Margaret with an expression of affection that left Michael even more confused. She said you couldn't know, that she didn't want to be a burden. A burden? Michael squeezed his mother's hands tighter. Mom, how can you say that? Margaret averted her gaze, focusing on some point on the opposite wall. You have your life, your business. You don't need a sick old woman getting in the way. Don't talk like that. Michael's voice came out choked. You would never be a burden to me. But I am, she insisted, finally meeting his eyes. Look at you, Michael, running from one place to another, building an empire, and me here, with my pains and weaknesses. You deserve to live your life without worrying about me. Michael felt something break inside his chest. When had they reached that point? When had his mother, the woman who raised him alone after his father abandoned them, started to feel like a burden? So, the water with vinegar? He asked, needing to understand everything. Amber stood up and picked up the bottle she had left on the sideboard. Michael noticed now that it had a clear liquid inside, with a slight smell of vinegar that he hadn't noticed before in the commotion of the moment. It's an old remedy, Amber explained. My grandmother used it when she had migraines. Cold water with apple cider vinegar, applied to the face and the back of the neck. It helps constrict blood vessels and relieve pressure. And does it work? Michael looked skeptically at the bottle. It works, Margaret answered, her voice stronger now. The pain that was unbearable 10 minutes ago has already been cut in half. Michael ran his hand over his face, trying to process it all. His businessman's mind, always so logical and organized, struggled to grasp the situation. But did you go to the doctor? Did you get tests done? Amber and Margaret exchanged a look that Michael couldn't decipher. We did, Amber finally said. 3 appointments in the last 2 weeks. 3 appointments? Michael sprang to his feet. And why didn't anyone tell me? Because I asked her not to, Margaret repeated, the stubbornness clear in her voice. And before you ask, yes, the doctors ran all the tests. MRI, CT scan, blood work, everything. And they didn't find anything serious, Amber finished. Chronic migraines probably related to stress and age. The doctors prescribed medication, but it made Mrs. Margaret so drowsy she could barely stand. Michael walked to the window, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. Outside, the mansion's garden was as impeccable as ever. The flowers his mother loved so much swayed in the afternoon breeze. Everything so normal, so perfect on the surface. While inside here, unbeknownst to him, his mother had been suffering in silence. How long have you had this pain, Mother? He asked without turning around. The silence that followed was answer enough. Mother? He insisted, turning to face her. Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping. About 6 months. 6 months! Michael felt the anger returning, but this time directed at himself. You've been suffering for 6 months and I didn't notice anything. You were busy, Margaret said simply. The merger with that tech company, the international trips, the issues with the shareholders. I heard you on the phone when you came to visit me. Always so tense, so worried. How could I add another problem? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Michael sat back down, this time on the sofa next to Amber. He looked at his girlfriend, really looked. She was only 28, 22 years younger than him. Straight brown hair falling over her shoulders, dark eyes that always seemed to see beyond what he showed. When they met at a coffee shop 6 months ago, she was working as a waitress to pay for the nursing school she had dropped out of due to lack of money. Did you know she had nursing training? Margaret asked, as if reading his thoughts. I knew, Michael replied. It was one of the first things she told me. Then you should also know that she has a heart bigger than this world, Margaret continued, and there was something different in her voice, something Michael hadn't heard in a long time. Affection. In the last 3 weeks, this girl has spent more time here taking care of me than at her own home. Michael looked at Amber, surprised. Is that true? Amber shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with the attention. I just did what anyone would do. No, Margaret shook her head. You did much more than that. You treated me with a kindness I didn't deserve. There was something in the way his mother said that which put Michael on alert, a weight, an unspoken guilt. He looked between the two women, sensing there was more to this story. What are you talking about, Mother? Margaret lowered her eyes, her hands clasped in her lap. I wasn't kind to Amber when you introduced her to me, Michael. You know that. He did. He remembered perfectly that Sunday, 3 months ago, when he brought Amber for lunch. His mother's coldness, the subtle but cutting remarks about the age difference, the questions about Amber's family that felt more like interrogations than genuine interest. Amber had endured it all with dignity, but Michael saw when she cried on the way home. Mother, let me finish, Margaret interrupted him. I was cruel to her, because I was afraid. Afraid that she was only interested in your money, afraid that she would hurt you, afraid of losing my son to someone I didn't know. Amber remained silent, but Michael saw her hands clench the towel tightly. I said terrible things, Margaret continued, her voice breaking, when you weren't around. I suggested she wasn't good enough for you, that she came from a place with no future, that a waitress would never understand the world you live in. Michael felt the anger bubbling up again. Mom, how could you? I know. Margaret wiped the tears that had started to fall. I know I was awful, and you know what's worse. When I fell that day, when I was on the floor with no strength to get up, the first person who showed up was her. And you know what she did? Michael looked at Amber, who had her eyes fixed on the floor. She picked me up in her arms, Margaret said, her voice choked. This small girl picked me up and carried me to the armchair, gave me water, put a cold compress on my forehead, stayed here holding my hand while the pain passed. And you know what she said when I apologized for being so horrible? Michael shook his head, unable to speak. She said, you were just protecting your son. I would have done the same. Margaret sobbed. What kind of person responds with kindness when they've received only cruelty? Amber finally raised her eyes, and Michael saw that she was crying too. I understand where the distrust came from, Amber said softly. My own mother would have reacted the same way if I showed up with someone 22 years older. It's instinct to protect who we love. Michael stood up and went to Amber, kneeling in front of her and holding her hands. Why didn't you tell me about how my mother treated you? Because I had hope that one day she would accept me, Amber answered, and because I knew that if you found out, you would fight with her, and I didn't want to be the cause of a fight between you. He pulled Amber into a hug, feeling her body tremble with sobs. I'm sorry, he murmured, for everything. When they separated, Michael went to his mother and also hugged her, something he realized he hadn't done in months. And I'm sorry too, Margaret said against his shoulder. for the way I treated Amber, for the things I said, for not trusting you to choose who you love." They stayed like that for a long moment, the clock marking time while three people tried to process everything that had been said. When they finally separated, Michael pulled up a chair and sat between the two women. "Okay, now I need to understand everything from the beginning," he said, trying to organize his thoughts. "Amber, when you found my mother that day, what exactly happened?" Amber dried her eyes and took a deep breath. "I had come to bring some recipes your mother had asked me for a few weeks before," she began. "It was an attempt to get closer, you know. She had mentioned she liked a cake my grandmother used to make, and I brought the recipe. When I arrived, the front door was ajar." "Ajar?" Michael looked at his mother, alarmed. "I had gone out to water the plants in the front garden," Margaret explained, "and when I came back, the pain started so strong that I barely managed to close the door before falling. I heard a noise," Amber continued, "like something had fallen. I went in calling out and found Mrs. Margaret on the floor here in the living room. She was conscious but moaning in pain, her hands pressing her temples." Michael imagined the scene and felt his stomach turn. "I wanted to call an ambulance immediately," Amber went on, "but she begged me not to, said it was just a migraine, that she had been through this before, that it would pass." "But it didn't pass," Margaret admitted. "It got worse. It was like my head was going to explode. I had never felt such intense pain." "I panicked," Amber confessed. "I didn't know what to do. But then I remembered how my grandmother used to treat her migraines. She always said the secret was to quickly cool the head and neck. I asked if Mrs. Margaret had ice, vinegar, cold water." "And you prepared that treatment right there," Michael completed. "Yes. I mixed ice water with apple cider vinegar, soaked a towel and applied it to her face and the back of her neck. In 15 minutes, the pain had lessened enough for her to be able to sit up." "And you stayed here with her the rest of the day," Margaret added. "You didn't want to leave me alone. You cancelled all your appointments, missed work at the coffee shop." Michael looked at Amber with a mixture of admiration and guilt. "Were you fired?" "No." Amber gave a weak smile. "My boss was understanding, but I lost a day's work." "And still you came back in the following days," Margaret said, "every day for the last 3 weeks. Always bringing something, food, medicine, company, taking me to doctor's appointments, waiting for hours in the offices." "I just wanted to help," Amber murmured. Michael stood up and walked to the window again, needing to process all of that. His girlfriend, the woman his mother had treated with such contempt, had repaid with unconditional kindness, while he, the son, was too busy to notice that his own mother was suffering. "The doctors really found nothing besides the migraine?" he asked, still with his back turned. "Nothing," Amber confirmed. "Mrs. Margaret has normal blood pressure, no neurological problems, no tumors or anything else serious. They're tension migraines, probably aggravated by stress." "Stress," Michael repeated, turning around. "What kind of stress could a woman who lives alone in a mansion, who doesn't need to work, who has everything she needs possibly have?" The silence that followed was eloquent. "Michael," Margaret called softly, "you really don't know." He looked at his mother, confused. "I don't know what you're talking about." Margaret stood up carefully, leaning on the arms of the armchair. Amber made a move to help her, but the elderly woman signaled that she was fine. "Come with me," she said to her son. "There's something I need to show you." Michael followed his mother through the wide hallway of the mansion, Amber coming behind them. They went up the stairs to the second floor, and Margaret guided them to one of the rooms Michael hadn't entered in years. It was his father's old office, turned into storage after he abandoned them. Margaret opened the door and turned on the light. The room was organized, unlike the mess Michael remembered from the last time he had been there. Labeled boxes, furniture covered with white sheets, shelves with books arranged by size. "When was the last time you came in here?" Margaret asked. "Years ago," Michael admitted. "After Dad left, I never wanted to see this place again." "I know." Margaret walked to one of the shelves and picked up a dark wooden box. "But I come here every week. Sometimes more." She placed the box on an old table and opened it. Inside were letters, photos, documents yellowed with time. "Mum, what is this?" "It's my life," Margaret said simply. "Or rather, the life I could have had." She picked up a faded photo and handed it to Michael. It was a young woman, no more than 25 years old, wearing a white nurse's uniform, smiling at the camera. It took a few seconds for Michael to recognize that it was his mother. "You were a nurse?" he asked, shocked. "I was," Margaret corrected. "For 4 years. I worked at Mercy General Hospital downtown. I loved what I did. I woke up every day happy to be able to help people." Michael looked at Amber, who seemed as surprised as he was. "You never told me that. Because it's a part of my life that I learned to hide." Margaret took more photos from the box. "When I met your father, he was a doctor at the same hospital. Brilliant, successful, from a traditional family, and I was just a nurse from a humble background, the daughter of a bus driver and a seamstress." She paused, her eyes lost in some distant memory. "His family hated when we started dating. They said I wasn't good enough, that I was a gold digger, that I'd never be accepted in their society. Your father stood up to all of them, said he loved me and would marry me no matter what." "And he did," Michael added, knowing this part of the story. "He did," Margaret confirmed. "But his family imposed one condition. I would have to quit nursing. It wouldn't be appropriate, they said, for the wife of a renowned doctor to work as a nurse. It would tarnish the family name." "And you accepted?" Amber asked, her voice heavy with sadness. "I did," Margaret lowered her eyes, "because I loved your father and thought it would be a small sacrifice, that I'd find happiness in being a wife and eventually a mother. But every day I spent away from the hospital, I felt a piece of me die." Michael had never heard this story before. His mother had always just been his mother. He'd never stopped to think about what she had been before, about the dreams she'd had, the choices she'd made. "When you were born," Margaret continued, picking up another photo, this time of a baby in her arms, "I thought I'd found my purpose. And for a few years I had. You were my joy, Michael. Taking care of you, watching you grow was all I needed. But—" Michael sensed there was a but coming. "But your father started to change." Margaret closed her eyes. "His trips got longer, his absences more frequent, and I started to suspect a wife always knows. He cheated on you," Michael said, old anger resurfacing. "Several times," Margaret confirmed without emotion. "With nurses, interestingly enough. Maybe because deep down they represented what he really wanted, someone from his world, from the hospital, from medicine, not an ex-nurse he'd turned into a housewife." "Mom, I didn't know." "No one knew." Margaret opened her eyes. "I hid it well, because admitting it would mean admitting I'd made the wrong choice, that I'd sacrificed my career, my identity, for a man who didn't value me." Amber moved closer and gently touched Margaret's arm. "And when he left for good 10 years ago," Margaret continued, "I thought it would be my chance to start over, to go back to nursing, to reclaim my life. But I discovered it was too late. 25 years out of the profession. The techniques had changed. I'd have to practically start from scratch. And worse, I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Michael asked. "Afraid of failing. Afraid to discover I wasn't capable anymore. Afraid that all those years of sacrifice had been for nothing." Margaret picked up another object from the box. It was a small cross-shaped pin with the nursing symbol. "So I kept everything here, my memories, my dreams, my old life, and pretended everything was fine. But it wasn't," Amber said softly. "No," Margaret agreed. "And the more time passed, the worse it got. You grew up, Michael, built your company, your life, and I stayed here, alone in this huge house, without purpose, without any identity beyond being Michael Thompson's mother." Michael felt tears burning his eyes. "Mom, you were never just that to me." "I know I wasn't." Margaret held his face in her hands. "But I became just that to myself. And this emptiness, this feeling of a wasted life, has been consuming me little by little. The headaches started a year ago, but they were mild. I ignored them. Then they got worse, more frequent, until in the last few months they became unbearable. The doctors said tension migraines can be caused by emotional stress, Amber added. When we hold on to grudges, regrets, sadness for too long, the body finds ways to manifest it. And I held on to it for 25 years, Margaret admitted. Until I couldn't take it anymore. Michael hugged his mother, feeling her fragile body tremble. All those times he thought she was fine, that she had adapted to the life of a wealthy widow, all those superficial conversations about the weather, about the neighbors, about nothing, while inside she was falling apart. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured, "for not noticing, for always being so busy, for leaving you alone with all this." "You didn't know," Margaret pulled away, wiping her tears. "How could you? I became an expert at hiding." "But I should have seen," Michael insisted. "I'm your son. I should have noticed something was wrong." "It wasn't your fault," Amber intervened. "Mrs. Margaret is very good at pretending everything is fine. She fooled me for weeks, even after I started coming here every day." "What do you mean?" Michael looked between the two. "Even after that first day when she fell," Amber explained. "She kept pretending the pain wasn't that bad, that the vinegar treatment was working perfectly, that she didn't need more help. Until I caught her hiding the medicine," Amber continued, her eyes fixed on Margaret. "She wasn't taking the medication the doctors prescribed." "Why?" Michael looked at his mother, incredulous. Margaret sighed and sat back down on the edge of the table. "Because they made me so drowsy that I slept almost the whole day, and sleeping meant dreaming. And my dreams," she paused, "my dreams showed me everything I had lost, everything that could have been. It was more painful than the migraines themselves." "So you preferred to endure the physical pain," Amber said, her voice full of emotion, "rather than face the emotional pain." "Yes," Margaret admitted. "Stupid, I know." "It's not stupid." Michael knelt in front of his mother. "It's human. But, Mom, you don't have to carry this alone, not anymore." "I know." Margaret touched her son's face. "Amber made me understand that." Michael looked at his girlfriend, questioning. "When I found out she wasn't taking the medicine," Amber explained, "we had a long talk, a very long one. She told me all this about nursing, about your father, about the regrets, and I told her about my grandmother." "Your grandmother?" "She was a nurse too," Amber smiled sadly. "She worked until she was 75 at a community health center in the outskirts. When I was little, she always said, 'Amber, never give up on your dreams for anyone, because when the person is gone, and everyone goes at some point, all that's left is you and your regrets.'" "A wise woman," Margaret commented. "She was," Amber agreed. "And she had migraines too, terrible ones, but she refused to take medicine because she said she needed to always be alert for her patients. She was the one who taught me the water and vinegar treatment." "And did it work?" Michael asked. "Not always," Amber admitted. "Sometimes the pain was too strong and she needed medication, but most of the time the home remedy relieved it enough for her to keep working. That's why you suggested it to my mother," Michael concluded. "Yes, but not just that." Amber looked at Margaret affectionately. "I also talked to her about going back to doing what she loved, even if it was as a volunteer or teaching or anything that would connect her back to nursing." Michael saw something change in his mother's face, a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "And you agreed?" he asked, hopeful. "I'm thinking about it," Margaret replied. "Amber showed me some volunteer programs at hospitals, nothing too physically demanding, but that would allow me to use my knowledge, my experience, help people again." "Mom, that would be amazing." Michael felt his heart tighten with joy and sadness at the same time. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid of your reaction," Margaret confessed. "You always saw me as your mother, the lady of the mansion, the widow of an important doctor. I was afraid you'd think, I don't know, inappropriate maybe, that your mother wanted to work as a volunteer nurse." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "Mum, I would never think that. If this is what makes you happy, if this is what will help you, I support you completely." "Really?" Margaret asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that broke Michael's heart. "Really?" he affirmed, holding her hands. "In fact, more than support. I want to help. What do you need? Equipment? Refresher courses? whatever it is. For the first time since he arrived at that house hours earlier, Michael saw his mother smile for real. Not that polite, empty smile she always showed, but a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "Thank you, son," she said. "Thank you for understanding. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." Amber wiped the tears streaming down her face, trying not to make noise. Michael stood up and pulled her into a hug, including his mother too. The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, in the middle of that room full of memories and possibilities. When they separated, Michael looked at his girlfriend with a serious expression. "Amber, I need to know something." She wiped her eyes, waiting. "Why did you do all this? After how my mother treated you, you had every reason to just walk away, to let her fend for herself. But you stayed. You took care of her. Spent hours here every day. Why?" Amber stayed silent for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Because when I found her fallen on the floor," she began slowly, "I saw more than a woman in pain. I saw someone completely alone. And I recognized that look." "What look?" Michael asked. "Of someone who gave up," Amber answered, her voice choked. "My mother had that same look when my father left us. She was a nurse too, you know. Worked for years in a public hospital. But when she got pregnant with me, my father's family pressured her to stop. They said the same things, that it wasn't appropriate, that she needed to dedicate herself to the family." Michael felt a tightness in his chest, seeing the pain on Amber's face. "She agreed," Amber continued, "out of love, but my father left her anyway, ran off with another woman when I was 5, and my mother stayed, alone, without a profession, without her own identity. She tried to return to nursing, but just like Mrs. Margaret, she felt it was too late." "What happened to her?" Margaret asked softly. "She got lost," Amber said simply. "Worked odd jobs, cleaning, anything, but that sparkle in her eyes, that will to live, never came back. She died 3 years ago from a heart problem, but I know it was from sadness, from a life unlived." "I'm so sorry." Michael held her hand. "When I saw Mrs. Margaret on the floor," Amber looked at the elderly woman, "I thought, I won't let this happen again. I won't stand by while someone gives up on their own life. Even if she doesn't like me, even if she doesn't want me around, I wasn't going to abandon her." Margaret stood up and hugged Amber tightly, both of them crying. "You saved me," Margaret murmured. "Not just from the pain, but from myself. You made me remember there's still time, that I can still make a difference." "There's always time," Amber replied. "My grandmother always said that. As long as there's life, there's time to start over." Michael watched the two women embracing and felt something change inside him. All his life he had built an empire focused only on profits, on expansion, on being the best. But what truly mattered was right there in front of him. Human connections, love, care, purpose. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, stepping away from Amber and going to the box. She pulled out a yellowed envelope. "I wrote this 2 weeks ago." She handed the envelope to Michael. When he opened it, he found a handwritten letter. "Read it aloud," Margaret requested. Michael unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Amber, I know you will never read this letter. I'll probably burn it after writing, like I've done with so many others over the years, but I need to put on paper things I don't have the courage to say in person. I was terrible to you. I said cruel things, treated you coldly, did everything to make you feel inadequate. And all because I was afraid that you were just another woman interested only in money, afraid that you would hurt my son, but mostly afraid because when I look at you, I see who I used to be. Young, full of dreams, passionate about helping people, and it reminds me of everything I lost, of all the wrong choices I made. You are everything I could have been if I had had the courage. You face the world with your head held high, work hard, study, fight for your dreams. And yet, you find the time and kindness to care for a bitter old woman who doesn't deserve it. When you found me fallen, you had every reason to turn your back. But you stayed. You cared for me with a kindness I didn't deserve. You treated me with dignity when I only gave you contempt. You made me remember why I loved being a nurse, why I woke up happy every day to go to work. Because caring for people, easing suffering, making a difference is the noblest purpose there is. Today, for the first time in 25 years, I thought about going back. Even if just to help a few hours a week. To feel again that sense of being useful, of having a purpose beyond being the rich mother who lives alone in a mansion. And that was only possible because you showed me that there is still time, that I don't have to die having lived only half my life. I don't know if my son will marry you. I don't know what the future holds. But I know that you deserve all the good in this world, and if he's smart, he'll realize he found a treasure. Thank you for saving me when I had already given up on myself. With all my affection and regret, Margaret. The silence that followed the reading was heavy with emotion. Michael folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling. Mom, when did you write this? The night after Amber convinced me to go to the first doctor, Margaret replied. I stayed up all night, thinking about everything. And I realized I had spent 3 weeks receiving kindness from someone I had been so cruel to. I needed to put it on paper. Why didn't you give it to her? Michael asked. Because I'm a coward, Margaret admitted. Because it's easier to write than to speak. Because I was afraid of her reaction. Amber took the letter from Michael's hands and read it again silently. When she finished, tears were streaming freely down her face. Can I keep it? She asked. It's yours, Margaret said. It always was. Amber folded the letter carefully and put it in her dress pocket. Thank you, she said simply, for trusting me with your words, with your pain, with your story. Thank you, Margaret replied, for not giving up on me. Michael looked at the clock on the wall and realized it was past 7 in the evening. They had spent hours in that room unpacking years of pain, regret, and finally hope. Mom, have you had dinner? He asked. No, Margaret admitted. With today's crisis, I didn't even think about food. Then I'll order delivery. Michael took out his phone, and we'll eat together, the 3 of us, and talk more. Because clearly we've spent too much time avoiding important conversations. Margaret smiled and agreed. Amber offered to help set the table, and the 3 went down to the kitchen. While waiting for the food to arrive, they talked about simple things. Michael shared about the problems at the company that had stressed him out in recent weeks. Margaret told old stories from the hospital where she had worked. Amber talked about her nursing classes that she hoped to resume soon. It was a normal, everyday conversation, but to Michael, it felt like the first real conversation they had had in years. No longer superficial and polite, but genuine and connected. When the food arrived, they ate together at the dining room table. Michael couldn't remember the last time he had a full meal with his mother. It was always a quick coffee, a rushed lunch before heading back to the office. But that night he turned off his phone and allowed himself to just be present. After dinner, Margaret started to get tired. The migraine episode had drained her energy. I think I'll go to bed, she said, getting up from the chair. I'll help you upstairs, Amber offered. No need, dear, Margaret said gently. I've already taken too much advantage of your kindness today. It's not taking advantage when it's offered with love, Amber replied, and there was such a deep truth in those words that Michael felt his eyes sting. The 2 went upstairs together, talking quietly. Michael watched them, seeing how Amber gently held Margaret's arm as they climbed the stairs, how his mother leaned on the young woman, not just physically, but emotionally. He cleared the table, needing to do something with his hands as he processed everything he had discovered that day. When Amber came down 15 minutes later, she found him in the kitchen washing the dishes. Is she okay? He asked without turning around. She is, Amber answered, picking up a towel to dry. She took a warm bath and is already in bed. She said the pain is almost completely gone now. They worked in silence for a few minutes, an easy and natural partnership. I'm sorry, Michael said finally, for everything. For not realizing what you were doing for my mother. For not defending you when she was cruel. For always being so busy with the company that I neglected the 2 most important people in my life. Amber put the plate she was drying in the cabinet and turned to him. Michael, you didn't know. None of us told the truth. Your mother hid the pain, I hid the visits. We were all keeping secrets. But I should have paid attention, he insisted. When you started coming home late, when you cancelled our dinners, I should have asked more, I should have cared more. You did care, Amber touched his face. You were just lost in your own worries. Like all of us. How did I get so lucky to find you? Michael asked, pulling her into a hug. It wasn't luck, Amber murmured against his chest. It was fate. I needed to meet your mother. She needed me as much as I needed her. What do you mean? Amber stepped back and went to the window, looking out at the dark garden. When my mother died, she began, I was left with a huge emptiness, a terrible guilt for not being able to save her, for not doing enough to make her want to live again. I carry that with me every day. Michael approached but let her continue at her own pace. So when I found your mother in that state, Amber went on, it was like having a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently, to really make a difference in someone's life before it was too late. And you did, Michael said. You saved her, Amber. Not just physically but emotionally. You gave back the hope she had lost. She saved me too, Amber turned to him. She showed me that what happened to my mother wasn't my fault. That some people don't want to be saved. But Mrs. Margaret did. She just needed someone who cared enough to insist. Michael hugged Amber again, holding her tight. I love you, he said. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. I love you too, Amber replied. And it's okay that it took time. Some things need time to mature. They held each other for a long moment, listening to the silence of the house. Eventually, Michael suggested that Amber sleep in the guest room. She agreed, admitting she was exhausted after everything that had happened. Michael went up to his mother's room and knocked lightly on the door. He heard her faint voice telling him to come in. Margaret was lying on the king-size bed, a dim lamp lighting the room. She looked small in that huge bed, vulnerable in a way Michael had never seen before. How are you feeling? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Better, she answered. Physically, at least. Emotionally, I'm still processing everything. Me too, Michael admitted. Mom, I want you to know that from now on things are going to change. Michael, let me finish, he gently interrupted. I spent years focused only on the company, building, growing, always chasing the next deal, the next million. And I thought that was what mattered, that it would define who I am. He paused, choosing his words. But today I realized I was wrong, that all the wealth in the world means nothing if you have no one to share it with, if you're not there for the people you love. Son, you have your life, your work is important. It is important, Michael agreed, but not more important than you, or than Amber. From now on, I'll be more present, more attentive. I won't let weeks go by without a real visit anymore. Margaret reached out and touched his face. Thank you, she said simply. And I want to help you with the volunteering, Michael continued. If you really want to get back into nursing, even part-time, I'll fully support you. We can look into programs together, see what makes sense for you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? I would, Michael smiled. In fact, I'm already doing it. I know some hospital administrators. I can talk to them, see what opportunities exist for volunteer nurses with experience. Michael, that would be wonderful, Margaret sobbed. You don't know how much this means to me. Yes, I do, he said, wiping her tears. Because I'm finally paying attention. I'm finally seeing you, Mom. Not just the version you show, but who you really are. Your dreams, your pains, your hopes. Margaret pulled her son into a tight hug. I love you so much, she murmured. I love you too, Mom, Michael replied. And I'm sorry I didn't show it better before. They held each other for a long moment. When they separated, Margaret already seemed calmer, her face more relaxed. Now get some rest, Michael said, adjusting the covers. Tomorrow we'll talk more about everything. Michael? She called as he was almost at the door. Yes? Amber is special. Don't let her get away. Michael smiled. I won't. I promise. He left the room and went to the guest room where Amber was. He knocked lightly and heard her say to come in. Amber was sitting on the bed, still dressed, looking out the window. "Can't sleep?" Michael asked. "Too many things on my mind," she admitted. "Today was an intense day." Michael sat beside her on the bed. "It was," he agreed, "but a necessary day. I think we all needed these revelations." "Is your mom okay?" "She is. Tired, but at peace." Michael took Amber's hand. "Thanks to you." "It wasn't just me," Amber protested. "It was mostly you," Michael insisted. "Amber, you did something I should have done. You saw my mother, really saw her, noticed her pain, her loneliness, her regrets, and instead of ignoring or judging, you cared." "She reminded me so much of my mother," Amber said softly. "How could I not care?" "Most people could," Michael replied, "especially after how she treated you. But you chose kindness. You chose to stay. And that changed everything." Amber rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what's funny?" she said. "All these months I was afraid you'd find out about the visits. I was scared you'd get angry, that you'd think I was intruding too much. And I was so busy I didn't even notice," Michael admitted. "I'm an idiot." "You're not," Amber lifted her head to look at him. "You're just human. We all get lost sometimes in the daily grind, in obligations, in worries. We forget to stop and really pay attention." "But now I will pay attention," Michael promised. "To you, to my mother, to us. No more constant trips, no more meetings that take up every weekend. I'll find a better balance." "You don't have to change who you are for me," Amber said. "I'm not changing who I am," Michael replied. "I'm going back to who I was, before I let work consume everything, before I forgot that life is more than balance sheets and contracts." They sat like that for a while, just enjoying each other's company in silence. "Amber?" Michael finally said. "Yes? Move in with me." She lifted her head abruptly. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated. "I know it's still early in our relationship. I know we've only known each other for 6 months. But today I realized I don't want to spend another day without you in my life. Completely." Amber was silent, processing. I don't know what to say," she finally replied. "Say yes," Michael smiled. "Or at least say you'll think about it." "I'll think about it," Amber said, but a small smile appeared on her face. "It's a big decision." "It is," Michael agreed. "But it would be good. Not just for us, but for my mother too. She's clearly attached to you. It would be nice to have you around more." "You can't use your mother as an argument," Amber lightly slapped his arm. "That's emotional manipulation." "It's the truth," Michael laughed. "But it's okay. No pressure. Think it over and let me know when you're ready." "Thank you." Amber lightly kissed his lips. "For understanding." Michael got up to leave, but Amber held his hand. "Stay here," she asked. "Just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone yet." "Of course." Michael sat back down on the bed. Amber lay down, her head on the pillow, and he sat beside her, holding her hand. Minutes later, her breathing steadied in sleep. Michael stayed there a few more minutes, just watching her sleep, before finally getting up carefully so as not to wake her. On the way to his mother's room, he stopped in the hallway, looking at the old photos on the walls. Photos from when he was a child, of his mother when she was young, of happy moments that seemed like another life. He realized then that they had stopped taking photos as a family years ago. When was the last time they sat together for a portrait? When was the last time they really built memories together? He made a silent promise there in the hallway. From then on, things would be different. He would be different. More present, more attentive, more connected to the people he loved. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The next morning, Michael woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. He looked at the clock and saw it was past 9. He hadn't slept that late in years. He went downstairs and found Amber and Margaret in the kitchen, speaking softly as they prepared breakfast. The scene was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment he just stood in the doorway watching. "Good morning," he finally said. The two turned around, smiling. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Amber teased. I thought you'd never wake up." "I slept like I haven't in months," Michael admitted, approaching to kiss Amber and then his mother. "How are you, Mom?" "Surprisingly well," Margaret replied. "No headache, no dizziness. I feel better than I have in weeks." "It's because you finally talked about everything," Amber said, placing bread on the table. "Keeping so much inside is bad for your whole body, not just your head." Michael sat at the table and watched the two women working together. There was an ease between them now, a connection that wasn't there before, as if the previous night's conversation had removed an invisible barrier. "I was thinking," Margaret said, pouring juice for everyone, "about what we talked about yesterday, about volunteering." "And?" Michael encouraged. "I want to do it," she said, her voice firm. "I don't know exactly where or how yet, but I want to go back, even if it's just a few hours a week. I want to feel useful again." "That's great, Mom," Michael smiled. "Like I said yesterday, I'll help you find the right place." "Actually," Amber interjected, "I have an idea." Both looked at her, waiting. "There's a health clinic on the east side where my grandmother used to work," she explained. "They always need volunteers, especially experienced nurses who can train the younger ones, give advice, help with the more complicated patients." "It would be perfect," Margaret said, her eyes shining. "Do you think they'd accept me, even after so many years away?" "I'm sure," Amber replied. "Life experience counts for a lot, and you have decades of knowledge to share." "Then let's go there tomorrow," Margaret decided. "I want to see the place, talk to the people in charge." "I'll go with you," Michael offered. "You don't have to, son," Margaret began, but he interrupted her. "I want to," he insisted. "In fact, I'll reschedule all my meetings tomorrow. This is more important." Margaret looked at her son with so much love and gratitude that Michael felt his chest tighten. They spent the rest of breakfast talking about plans, possibilities, dreams. It was as if a door had opened, allowing everyone to finally be honest about what they wanted, what they needed. After breakfast, while Margaret went upstairs to shower, Michael and Amber stayed in the kitchen cleaning up. "Thank you," Michael said suddenly. "For what?" Amber asked, confused. "For everything. For taking care of my mother. For not giving up on her. For showing me that I was missing what really matters." "You weren't missing it," Amber said gently. "You were just a little lost. But you found your way back." Michael pulled Amber into a hug. "I love you," he murmured. "So much." "I love you too," Amber replied. They stayed like that for a moment before Michael pulled away. "About what I asked you yesterday," he began. "About moving in with me. You don't have to answer now. I just want you to know I meant it." "I know," Amber smiled, "and I'm thinking about it, really." "No pressure," Michael promised again. "Michael?" she called as he started to leave the kitchen. "Yes?" "Yes." He turned around, confused. "Yes? Yes, I'll move in with you," Amber said, her smile widening. "I thought about it all night. And you're right, it makes sense. For us and for your mother, too." Michael crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and took her in his arms, spinning her in the air. "Really?" he asked, almost not believing. "Really?" Amber laughed. "But with one condition." "Anything?" Michael set her back down. "We keep coming here to visit your mother. No less than 3 times a week. Family dinners, real conversations, no more 15-minute visits rushing off to a meeting." "Agreed," Michael agreed immediately. "In fact, I'll do better than that. I'll hire someone to take on more responsibilities at the company, so I can have more free time." "You don't need to do that," Amber said. "Yes, I do," Michael replied. "Not for you, not for my mother, for me. Because I realized I spent so much time building a company that I forgot to build a life." Amber kissed him gently. "Then let's build it together," she said. "A real life with time for what matters." In the weeks that followed, real changes began to happen. Michael kept his word and hired a CEO to handle the company's daily operations, freeing up his own time. Amber moved into his apartment, but as promised, they visited Margaret regularly. Margaret started her volunteer work at the health clinic, where Amber's grandmother had worked. On the first day, she was as nervous as a student on the first day of school. But when she put on the white coat and entered the examination room, something in her transformed. Michael and Amber picked her up at the end of that first day. They found Margaret sitting at the reception, chatting animatedly with a young nurse about venipuncture techniques. "How was it?" Michael asked when they finally got her attention. "Wonderful," Margaret replied, and her face was literally glowing. "I saw 4 patients today, helped with 2 complicated dressings, taught an old technique for relieving colic in babies. I feel like I've come home." In the car on their way to dinner together, Margaret couldn't stop talking about the day, about the patients, the other volunteers, the interesting medical cases. Michael could hardly remember the last time he saw his mother so excited. "And you know the best part," Margaret said. "I didn't have any headaches today, not a single twinge." "Because you're happy," Amber said from the back seat. "The body responds to emotional state. When we're doing something we love that gives us purpose, stress decreases." "Amber is right," Michael agreed. "You spent years suppressing who you really are. Now that you're living according to your true identity, your body is responding." "I never thought I'd have this chance," Margaret admitted, her eyes moist. "At 72, I thought all that was left for me was to age gracefully and wait. But you two gave me a new life." "You gave yourself a new life," Amber corrected. "We only helped open the door. But you were the one who had the courage to walk through it." They dined at a small, cozy restaurant that Margaret used to frequent with friends decades ago. During the meal, an elderly woman approached their table. "Margaret Thompson?" the woman asked. Margaret looked up and her face lit up. "Dorothy, my goodness, it's been so long." "Decades," the woman, Dorothy, replied. "I think the last time we saw each other was at the hospital, before you left." "Before I gave up, you mean?" Margaret said, but there was lightness in her voice. "But now I'm back, volunteering at the health clinic on the east side." "Really?" Dorothy seemed genuinely happy. "That's wonderful. I always knew you'd come back. You were too good to stay away forever." The two chatted for a few minutes, exchanging phone numbers and promising to meet for coffee. When Dorothy left, Margaret had tears in her eyes. "She was my best friend from my hospital days," Margaret explained. "When I stopped working, I cut ties with everyone from that world. It was too painful. But seeing her now, being able to say I'm back," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Michael and Amber understood. The months passed, and the routine they established became natural. 3 times a week, Michael and Amber had dinner with Margaret. On weekends, they did activities together: movies, parks, exhibitions, simple things but meaningful. Margaret became a key figure at the health center. The other volunteers sought her out for advice. Patients specifically asked for her. She was training a group of young nurses, passing on decades of accumulated knowledge. The migraines didn't disappear completely, but became rare. And when they happened, Amber was there with her water and vinegar treatment, or Margaret knew how to manage them on her own now. Michael significantly reduced his work hours. He discovered he could be just as efficient in 40 hours a week as he was in 80. The difference was focus and priorities. Amber resumed her nursing studies, this time with Michael's financial support. She protested initially, but he insisted. "It's an investment," he said. "In you, in us, in the future." One Saturday, 4 months after that fateful afternoon, Michael proposed to Amber. It wasn't elaborate, just the 3 of them having dinner at Margaret's house, as they regularly did. But when Michael knelt and opened the little box with the ring, both Amber and Margaret started crying. "Yes," Amber said before he even asked the official question. 1,000 times yes. Margaret stood up and hugged them both, laughing and crying at the same time. "I have the best daughter-in-law in the world," she said. "The daughter I never had." "And I have the best mother-in-law," Amber replied. "The mother I always wanted." The wedding was simple and small, just close family and intimate friends. Margaret made sure to organize everything personally, saying she had lost too many years being passive in her own life. On the wedding day, when Amber came down the stairs of Margaret's house in her simple but elegant wedding dress, it was Margaret who accompanied her to the altar, not her father who had abandoned the family years ago. "Thank you," Amber whispered as they walked, "for accepting me, for loving me, for being the mother I needed. Thank you, Margaret replied, for saving me when I had given up on myself, for showing me it's never too late to start over. The ceremony was moving and sincere. When Michael and Amber exchanged vows, there was so much love in the air that several guests cried openly. At the party afterward, Margaret surprised everyone with a speech. "Most of you know me as Michael's mother," she began, "the wealthy widow who lives alone in a mansion. But today, I want to share a story about loss, regret, and finally redemption." She told everything. About her nursing career that she abandoned, about the years of unhappiness, about the migraines that were manifestations of emotional pain, about how she almost gave up completely. "And then," she continued, looking at Amber, "this extraordinary woman came into my life. I was awful to her, cruel, prejudiced, but she responded with kindness. When she found me at the lowest point of my life, she didn't judge me, she helped me." Margaret wiped away tears. "Amber taught me that it's never too late to start over, that our mistakes don't define who we are, but rather what we do after acknowledging them. At 72 years old, I returned to doing what I love. I regained purpose, and that was only possible because she refused to give up on me." She raised her glass. "So today, I'm not just gaining a daughter-in-law. I'm gaining a daughter, a friend, a savior. Amber, welcome officially to the family. You've always been part of it, from the moment you chose to stay when you had every reason to leave." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the party, when everything was winding down and the guests were leaving, Michael found his mother alone in the garden looking at the stars. "Deep in thought?" he asked, approaching. "Thinking about how strange life is," Margaret replied. "6 months ago I was convinced my life was over, that there was nothing ahead but loneliness and pain. And now—" She gestured toward the house where Amber was helping organize the gifts. "Now I have more than I ever thought possible. A son who's truly present, a daughter-in-law who's become a daughter, a purpose that makes me wake up every day wanting to live. How did this happen?" "It happened because you let it," Michael said. "Because when Amber reached out, you accepted. Even though you were scared, even though you were proud, you let someone in. And that changed everything." Margaret turned to her son. "You know I had plans," she admitted quietly. "On the worst days when the pain was unbearable and the loneliness was crushing, I thought about giving up. Completely." Michael felt his blood run cold. "Mom, I didn't," she reassured him quickly. "It never went that far. But I thought about it. About how it would be easier, how you'd be better off without a sick and bitter mother." "Don't ever think that." Michael hugged her tightly. "Never ever think I'd be better off without you." "I know that now," Margaret said against his shoulder. "Now I know I had value, that I still have so much to offer. But I had to almost lose everything to realize it." They held each other for a long moment. When they separated, Amber was coming toward them through the garden. "The last guests have left," she said, "and I'm officially exhausted." "Then let's go home," Michael said, offering her his arm. "Wait," Margaret called. I have something for you." She went inside the house and returned with a small package. She handed it to Amber. "Open it," Margaret encouraged. Amber carefully unwrapped the gift paper and found a small velvet box. Inside was the nurse's pin that Michael had seen that day in his father's office. "It was mine," Margaret explained. "I wore it every day during my 4 years at the hospital. When I stopped working, I kept it. I thought it would never be useful again." She took the pin from Amber's hands and fastened it to her dress. "But now I want you to have it. You who will follow the path I abandoned. You who have the courage I didn't have. Wear it with pride." Amber touched the pin delicately, tears running down her face. "I will," she promised. "And I will honor your legacy, the legacy you're rebuilding now." The three of them hugged there in the garden, under the stars. A family built not just by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by forgiveness, by love. The months became years. Amber graduated from nursing school and started working at the same health clinic where Margaret volunteered. They often worked together, the young woman learning from the older one's experience, the older one renewing herself with the young woman's energy. Michael continued with his company, but in a balanced way. He never again let work consume his entire life. On Thursday nights, without fail, the whole family had dinner together at Margaret's house. On Sundays, Margaret went to their apartment for lunch. Margaret's migraines became so rare that she stopped taking medication completely. Occasionally an episode would occur, but now she knew how to handle it, and she always had Amber nearby with her water and vinegar treatment. Margaret developed a mentorship program at the health clinic, where older nurses, retired or semi-retired, trained younger ones. The program was so successful that other clinics in the city began implementing it. On a special afternoon, Margaret was invited to give a lecture at a university about the importance of never giving up on your dreams, no matter your age. The room was packed, not just with students, but with people of all ages who needed to hear that message. "I spent 25 years of my life believing I had missed my chance," she told the attentive audience. 25 years holding on to regret and bitterness. But I discovered, at 72, that it's never too late. That as long as there's life, there's possibility for a fresh start. She told her complete story: the abandoned career, the unhappy marriage, the migraines, the loneliness. And then she told them about Amber, about how a young nurse refused to give up on a bitter old woman. "She saved me," Margaret said, seeing Amber seated in the front row next to Michael. "But more importantly, she showed me how to save myself, how to find value in myself again, how to have purpose." The talk ended with a standing ovation. Afterwards, dozens of people approached her. Elderly people who thought their lives were over, young people who had abandoned dreams due to family pressure, everyone wanting to know how to start over. And Margaret, patiently, spoke with each one, offering not easy solutions but her own experience, her own testimony that change is possible. That evening, having dinner with Michael and Amber at her favorite restaurant, Margaret was radiant. "You know," she said, "today I realized something. If I could go back in time, if I could change everything that happened, I wouldn't change a thing." Michael and Amber looked at her, surprised. "I'm serious," she continued, "because everything I went through, all the pain, all the regret, brought me here, made me who I am today. And today, for the first time in decades, I truly like who I am." She reached her hands across the table, holding Michael's and Amber's. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me, for loving me even when I didn't love myself, for showing me it's never too late to start living again." "Thank you," Amber replied, "for letting me in, for trusting me, for being the example that people can change, grow, be reborn." Michael squeezed the hands of the two most important women in his life. "Thank you, both of you," he said, "for teaching me what really matters, for showing me that success isn't measured in money or power, but in connections, in love, in presence." They toasted, not to professional or material achievements, but to something much more precious, to second chances, to chosen family, to the courage to start over. 3 years after that fateful day, when Michael found Amber splashing water with vinegar on Margaret's face, the 3 lives were completely transformed. Margaret now coordinated the mentorship program at 5 different health clinics. Her work had impacted dozens of young nurses and hundreds of patients. She had found not only her purpose, but her renewed calling. Amber had become one of the most respected nurses at the health clinic, known for her compassion and knowledge. She was pursuing a specialization in palliative care, wanting to help patients during the most difficult times of their lives. Michael had completely restructured his company to operate more sustainably and balanced. He had implemented policies that allowed employees to have better work-life balance, understanding now the importance of that. But the greatest transformation wasn't visible in achievements or external changes. It was in how they related to each other, in the honest conversations, in the shared moments, in the love expressed not just in words but in presence. On a Sunday afternoon, the 3 were in the garden of Margaret's house. Michael was trying to fix a broken fence. Amber was helping Margaret plant new flower beds. The conversation flowed easily, interspersed with laughter and comfortable silences. "Do you remember that day?" Margaret asked suddenly, when Michael arrived and saw Amber splashing water on me. Michael stopped what he was doing and laughed. How could I forget? I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. Me too, Amber admitted. I thought that was the end of our relationship right then and there. But it was the beginning of everything, Margaret said thoughtfully. That moment of shock, of revelation, opened all the floodgates. It forced all of us to be honest, to stop hiding. True, Michael agreed. If I hadn't arrived at that moment, if I hadn't seen that, maybe we would have stayed on the surface longer. You hiding the pain, Amber hiding the visits, me hiding in work. Sometimes, Amber reflected, we need a shock to wake up, to realize what really matters. Margaret stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands. I'll get water for these flowers, she said, but before leaving she stopped and looked at Michael and Amber with an expression they knew well by now. Pure and simple love. I love you, she said, more than words can express. We love you too, Mom, Michael replied. Always, Amber added. Margaret nodded and headed toward the house, a slight smile on her lips. Michael and Amber watched her go, seeing not the fragile and lost woman from years ago, but someone strong, with purpose, alive. You know, Michael said to Amber, that afternoon when I arrived and saw you, I thought my world was falling apart. But actually, it was just starting to truly build itself. Amber rested her head on his shoulder. Sometimes, she said, the best things come from the hardest moments. If I hadn't found your mother that day, if she hadn't fallen, if I hadn't stayed, none of this would have happened. I don't believe in fate, Michael said, but sometimes it seems like some things were meant to happen. Or maybe, Amber suggested, we create our own destiny with the choices we make. I chose to stay. Your mother chose to open up. You chose to pay attention. And here we are. Michael kissed the top of her head. Here we are, he agreed. And there's no place in the world I'd rather be. Margaret returned with a watering can, but stopped when she saw the two embracing. She said nothing, just smiled and continued with her flowers. Some moments were too perfect to be interrupted. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the garden of that house, 3 people who had been lost each in their own way had found not only each other but themselves. Margaret's migraines were now a distant memory, not because they had been cured by some miracle treatment, but because the pain that caused them had been faced, processed, and finally let go. Michael no longer measured success in hours worked or contracts signed, but in present moments, in meaningful conversations, in expressed love. Amber no longer carried the guilt of the mother she couldn't save, because she had learned that salvation isn't something you give to someone, but something you help the person find within themselves. And together they had built something beautiful, a family not defined by obligations or conventions, but by conscious choice, by unconditional love, by genuine presence. As night fell and they moved inside the house, preparing the Sunday dinner that had become a tradition, there was a sense of fullness in the air. Not the false fullness of problems perfectly solved, but the real fullness of lives being lived authentically. The conversations during dinner flowed naturally, touching on serious and light topics with equal ease. Margaret shared stories about her patients at the health clinic. Amber talked about her graduate classes. Michael told them about a new project at his company focused on social responsibility. But between the words, in the pauses, in the exchanged glances, there was something deeper. Gratitude. Each one grateful for the others, grateful for the path that had brought them there, grateful for the transformations that had allowed it. After dinner they sat in the living room. Margaret picked up an old photo album. I found this the other day, she said, when I was organizing the attic. She opened the album and began showing old photos. Young Margaret in her nurse's uniform, baby Michael, moments from a life that seemed to have been lived by different people. It seems so distant, Margaret commented, touching a photo of herself at 25, as if it were another person. It was, Amber said gently. You're a different person now. We all are. Better, Margaret corrected. We're better people now. Michael pointed to a photo of Margaret smiling at the hospital door. That smile, he said. It's the same one I see on your face now when you come back from the health center. You found that again, Mum. That joy. Margaret touched the photo, her eyes misty. I thought I had lost it forever, she admitted, but you helped me find it. Not just the joy, but myself. They spent hours looking at photos, sharing memories, laughing and sometimes crying. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure emotion, of recognition of how much they had grown, changed, evolved. When it was finally time for Michael and Amber to go home, the goodbyes were warm, but not sad. They knew they would see each other again in a few days, as always. In the car, Amber said, "Your mother is so different, so alive." "Thanks to you," Michael replied. "Thanks to us," Amber corrected. "Thanks to her, too. She made the hardest choice, to change. We just supported." "You always see the best in people," Michael commented. "I learned from my grandmother," Amber smiled. "She always said that every person has light inside them. Sometimes they just need someone to help them remember how to light it." Michael took Amber's hand and kissed it. "You light fires," he said. "You lit my mother's. You lit mine. It's a rare gift." "Everyone has that gift," Amber said. "They just need to choose to use it." They arrived home and, as always, Michael made sure to walk Amber to the door before parking the car. Small gestures, small attentions, that together built a solid foundation of love and respect. Later that night, lying in bed, Michael said, "You know something? That day, when I saw you throwing water on my mother, my first thought was horror. But now, looking back, I see it was the most important moment of my life." "Why?" Amber asked, turning to look at him. "Because it forced me to wake up," Michael explained. "To really see. To realize I was losing everything that mattered while chasing things that didn't matter as much." "They weren't unimportant," Amber said. "Your work, your company, those things have value. They just can't be the only thing." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "And I had made them the only thing until that day, until all the revelations that came after." They stayed silent for a moment, just enjoying each other's closeness. "Amber," Michael said finally. "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up, on my mother, on me, on us." "I would never give up," Amber replied, "because I saw what was beneath the surface, in you, in your mother. I saw the potential for something beautiful, and I was right." Michael pulled her closer. "You were," he agreed. "You always are." In the mansion across town, Margaret was also lying down, but unlike past nights when the loneliness was overwhelming, now she felt at peace. She looked at the nurse's pin that Amber had returned to her after graduation, saying she should have it back now that the two worked together. Margaret held the small metal object, thinking about all the twists and turns life takes. Everything she thought she had lost permanently had found its way back to her in unexpected ways. Her nursing career, recovered through volunteer work. Her identity, rediscovered when she put on the white coat again. Her purpose, renewed by teaching and helping others. Her family, expanded by gaining not just a daughter-in-law but a daughter of the heart. And perhaps most importantly, her peace. That feeling of being right with herself, of no longer carrying the weight of regrets and unmade choices. The migraines that had tormented her were, she now understood, physical manifestations of unprocessed emotional pain. When she finally let the pain out, through honest conversations, genuine tears, real connections, her body no longer needed to scream through symptoms. She thought of all the women she had met over the years who, like her, had abandoned dreams for social expectations, who had lost themselves in roles others had defined for them, and she felt a renewed mission to help them find themselves again. At the health clinic, she didn't just teach nursing techniques. She shared her story. She showed older women that it's never too late. She showed younger women that they didn't need to sacrifice who they are for who others want them to be. Margaret fell asleep that night, not with the anxiety that had accompanied her for so many years, but with anticipation for the next day, for what she would do, who she would help, what difference she could make. The years kept passing, each one bringing its challenges and joys. But the foundation they had built, of honesty, presence, unconditional love, remained firm. Amber completed her specialization, and began developing a palliative care program at the health clinic, with Margaret as her main mentor. Together, they helped dozens of patients face the final moments of their lives with dignity and peace. Michael expanded the company, but in a conscious and balanced way. He implemented a program where executives were encouraged to do volunteer work, understanding now that true success includes social responsibility. And Margaret, at 76, was more active and happy than she had been in decades. She gave regular lectures, wrote articles about active aging, and was constantly sought out by people who needed to hear her message that it's never too late to start over. But despite all these achievements, when asked to identify the most important moment of her transformation, Margaret always went back to that day, the day she fell, the day Amber found her, the day she chose to accept help instead of continuing to pretend she was fine. "It was the day," she would say, "when I stopped surviving and started living again." And Amber, when telling her part of the story, always emphasized the choice. The choice to stay when it would have been easier to leave. The choice to see potential instead of just problems. The choice to believe that people can change, grow, be reborn. "My grandmother used to say," Amber shared, "that the greatest tragedy isn't when someone dies, but when someone stops living while they're still alive. Mrs. Margaret had stopped living, but she chose to start over. And that choice changed not only her life, but mine and Michael's too." Michael, in turn, talks about that moment of shock when he entered the house and saw the scene he initially interpreted so wrongly. "It was like the universe slapped me in the face," he would recount, "forcing me to wake up, to see what I was missing while pretending everything was fine." That moment of confusion and fear ended up being the catalyst for everything that came after. The three stories of Margaret, Amber, and Michael had become so deeply intertwined that it was now impossible to tell one without the others. There were three people who were lost, each in their own way, and who found each other through circumstances that seemed terrible at the time, but ended up being transformative. At a charity event years later, the three were invited to speak about overcoming challenges and transformation. They decided to tell the story together, each sharing their perspective. Margaret spoke about the years of silent pain, of lost identity, of how she had reached a point where she no longer saw any reason to continue. She spoke about the day she fell, about the fear and shame she felt when Amber found her, and about the decision to accept help instead of continuing to pretend. "I could have sent her away," Margaret told the silent audience. "I could have insisted I was fine, like I always did. But something that day, perhaps the very intensity of the pain, broke through my defenses. And for the first time in decades, I let someone truly see me, vulnerable, broken, lost. And you know what happened? She didn't run away, she stayed." Amber took the microphone next. "When I found Mrs. Margaret on the floor," she shared, "my first instinct was professional, assess, treat, stabilize. But then, when I saw the pain in her eyes, I recognized something deeper. I recognized my own mother, another woman who had lost herself, and I made a silent promise at that moment. I wouldn't let that happen again. I wouldn't stand by and do nothing." She paused, emotional. "My mother is gone without ever rediscovering who she really was. But Mrs. Margaret isn't, because she had courage. Courage to be vulnerable, to accept help, to make difficult choices. And that made all the difference." Finally, Michael shared his part. "I was a successful businessman," he said. "I had money, power, influence, but I was completely disconnected from what truly matters. My mother was suffering in silence and I didn't notice. My girlfriend was dedicating her time to caring for her, and I didn't know. I was so lost in my world of business that I had become blind to the life around me." He looked at Margaret and Amber beside him. "That day, when I came home early and saw what I thought was a terrible scene, was the wake-up call I needed. It was the moment that forced me to stop, to really look, to finally see. And what I saw changed everything." The event ended with a standing ovation. Afterwards, dozens of people approached them, each with their own story of pain, of loss, of being lost, wanting to know how to start over, how to reconnect, how to truly live. And Margaret, Amber, and Michael patiently shared what they had learned. Not as experts or gurus, but as people who had walked through fire and come out the other side transformed. "There's no magic formula," Margaret would say. "Just choices. The choice to be honest, the choice to ask for help, the choice to accept love, the choice to try again." "And patience," Amber added. "Real change takes time. It has ups and downs, good days and bad days. But if you keep making the right choices, one day you'll wake up and realize you're in a completely different place." "And presence," Michael concluded. "Being truly present, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. Paying attention to the people you love, noticing when something is wrong, caring enough to act." Heading home that night, the three were exhausted but satisfied. "I think we helped some people today," Amber said. "I'm sure," Margaret agreed. "I saw it in their eyes, that spark of hope, that maybe I can too." "And they can," Michael affirmed. "We are proof of that. If we could do it, anyone can." They had dinner together that night, as they always did. The conversation flowed easily, touching on serious and light topics. There was laughter and also some moments of thoughtful silence. As the night came to an end, and it was time for Michael and Amber to leave, the farewell hugs were long and tight. "I love you," Margaret said, as she always did. "We love you too," they replied in unison. In the car on the way home, Amber said, "You know what's amazing? How something that started so terribly turned into something so beautiful." "It's what you always say," Michael smiled. "From the greatest difficulties come the greatest transformations." "It's true," Amber agreed. "Your mother was at her lowest point when we met. I was carrying the pain of losing my mother. You were lost in your work. And look at us now." "A family," Michael finished. "A real family. Not just in name, but in essence." "And it all started with water and vinegar," Amber laughed. Michael laughed too. Who would have thought? "Your grandmother's home remedy not only relieved migraines but saved a family." "She would be proud," Amber said thoughtfully, "to know that something she taught made such a difference." "She is proud," Michael said with conviction. "Wherever she is proud of you, of everything you've become, of how you use what you learned from her to make a difference in the world." Amber wiped away a tear that escaped. "Thank you," she said, "for always knowing exactly what to say." "It's easy when it's true," Michael replied. At home, getting ready for bed, Michael looked at the calendar and noticed something. "Do you know what day it is tomorrow?" he asked. "Thursday?" Amber replied, confused. "No, I mean the date," Michael pointed out. "It's exactly 5 years tomorrow." Amber looked at the calendar and understood. 5 years since that day. 5 years, Michael repeated. Half a decade. "And how much has changed?" "Everything changed," Amber said. "We changed." "For the better," Michael added. "Definitely for the better," Amber agreed. They lay down but stayed awake talking for hours about everything that had happened in those 5 years. The struggles, the victories, the moments of doubt and the moments of absolute clarity. "Do you have any regrets?" Michael asked. "About any of the choices you made?" Amber thought for a moment. "None," she said finally. "Every choice, even the difficult ones, brought me here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Michael admitted. "Sometimes I think about what my life would be like if you hadn't shown up that day, if you hadn't stayed, if you hadn't cared." "Don't think about that," Amber said gently, "because it happened, and it was exactly as it should be." "Do you believe in fate?" Michael asked. "I believe in choices," Amber replied. "I believe that every choice we make leads us down a different path. And if we make choices guided by love, compassion, and courage, we usually end up in good places." "Midnight philosophy," Michael joked. "Midnight truth," Amber corrected, smiling. Eventually, sleep overcame them. But even in their sleep, there were smiles on their faces. Across town, Margaret was also awake, thinking about the same 5 years. She picked up a journal she had started writing at the suggestion of a therapist she saw briefly after starting volunteer work. End of story. And now tell us what you thought of this story. Did you identify with any of the characters? Have you ever been through a family disconnect situation that was resolved with dialogue and patience? Leave your comment, sharing your experience. Don't forget to leave your like on this video and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories about love, family, and second chances. Your participation is very important to us. Thank you very much for joining us this far.